I want to talk a little bit more about Python. And since yesterday I told you exactly why Python is a good language to learn, as it's easier to understand, it has a great community support and support in general, from example, thousands and well, hundreds of thousands actually libraries around the world. Now I want to talk about the bads of Python, and I want to do this to understand well the limits of Python pretty much. Because I think usually when I'm seeing the negative things, not as a reason of why you not learn this, but a reason to you learn this even better. Because Python has some serious disadvantages if you consider if you want something specific. But this shouldn't dismotivate you to learn Python. It just should make you understand it better, understand its limits, and well, what will not be in its capabilities. So that's pretty much why I would like to talk about, you see, the negatives or something. So there's something stuck in my eye, but let's pretty much get to it then. And one of the first points is that because Python is so simple, it needs to be simple as somewhere. And it's very interesting because Python is what they call interpreted language. That means, and not just that, but a dynamically typed language. Those are two great things for a programmer as for pretty much creating the code. As an interpreted language and a dynamic type language makes your code, well, it interprets your code yourself. So you don't need to exactly interpret all your code. The computer does a little bit of stuff for you. For example, here, I'm not defining what my variable is, but I will I'm not defining what my variable var test is, but Python itself is giving me this. For example, here I say to input your input here, and when I do this, it will turn me, even though I didn't specify it, a string variable, as you can see here, because I need to put here. It will not make a int variable or as integer variable, as you can see here. But uh, well, you can see, for what I know, this is a good example for this point. In the input here is not specified as a string, but it is being string, is acting, and the computer interprets that way. And also, it's simple. It's simple. It's sorry, I got a little bit out here. It's the reason why it's so simple, or one of them, is because well, Python interprets a lot of things for you, and don't need to put as much code as you need as in other programming language. You don't need to do this. After all, the computer is doing a little bit for you. But the problem with this is for the computer to interpret something for you, it takes longer. It is harder for the computer to do this. So that's pretty much one reason. It's harder for understand. Come here. It's harder for the computer to do everything while also running your code, to interpret your code while running your code at the same time. So that's a bad thing. And also because of that, it pretty much has a trade-off for this, and which not just a slow speed, but it's not memory efficient because it needs to be doing more process per process. I like to call it that. So it's making more process, for example, a code than normally would take, because it's also kind of interpreting the code. For example, defining the variables. You don't specify what the variable is. Well, the computer will specify for you, but it needs to take the power somewhere, and that's pretty much it. It would take the memory or more RAM. So basically, if you're running a big code, I mean, when I say big code, it's because it's usually more obvious in a bigger code. But if you're taking a code in general and you try to run Python versus, let's say, any other language that does not have those fine problems, it will usually run faster, more memory efficient, and well, that's the biggest two things really. Um, so that's well, that's not good. Though it is unavoidable again because Python is such so simple because the computer does some process for you. It's kind of unavoidable, really. And talking about unavailable, sadly, something that is avoidable, but there it is. Python has kind of a hard time accessing databases, though it is actually used a lot for this. It says here, for example, that the Python database access layer is primitive and underdeveloped comparison to other popular technologies like GDBC or ODBC. Now, I do not don't know what is the GDBC or ODBC, but it could kind of make if this is really the case, again, it's kind it's kind of opinion of mine. It would make sense though because if there is no smooth connection with something that you need for a database, then the code will feel if you let's say feels kind of snappy pretty much. So if it has a not smooth connection, it will be very noticeable in excess. So that's one also big problem. And well, the last the last problems actually does make Python, even though it runs the same on every machine, it's usually not liked in mobile computing because mobile computing you're working with limited resources. You're not going to have a 64 RAM, 128 gigabytes of RAM, or I don't know, 2 terabytes of pure SSD. The SSD, I think 3.0 actually now, or 2.0. You don't have that. You have, I would say 16, but I think more modern phones actually have 32 gigabytes, which actually is easy practice. No, I probably talking, but yeah, what should not make sense. You are working. If I probably search here, I think most phones work on 4 to 8. Sometimes, though, I think it's pretty rare. 16 gigabytes of RAM, and you need to consider it runs a lot of things with this RAM. So you're working again to simplify. You're working with very limited resources, and because Python does use more because of well, you see, because of it's so easy to program, it's also again more resource intensive, and that means it's not exactly the best option of to a cell phone. Again, you can run on cell phones, no problem. The only problem is that if you're running something bigger, something heavier with Python, you will have a bad time of it because this cell phone probably won't support based. And if you think about it, there's a big problem with the dynamically typed language. Again, a dynamically typed language is that the computer kind of interprets for you. For example, again, in my test code here, this is an example of dynamic typing. I just run a code here. I do not say, I do not um, pretty much I do not give this variable its meaning. If it's a string or if it's a integer. And the Python just pretty much tells me what it is. So here it says it's a string, even though I put a number here, I'm not specifying the string. So that's pretty much a good example. Now, what's bad about this is that if for some reason there is a change on Python or the code is very, let's say, murky, the best kind of language, I would say murky, or computer maybe has a hard time or a harder time understanding some variable. The computer might, the computer might just have a problem with it. And that actually makes quite sense. So if you're, for example, using an old version of Python, it will probably understand variables differently than a newer version of Python. So that means that as the generations go along of Python, sometimes there's something called runtime errors, which is that Python or the dynamically typed part of Python will not be able to understand something, or it will interpret a language or something you wrote as differently than it usually originally interpreted. So that's kind of a bad problem, because if you're trying to evolve, if you're trying to uh, make a better code for it, or sorry, you're trying to update or upgrade your Python, you might have a bad time with it. If I actually remember, I think that's kind of a turning point uh, when you're trying to upgrade a Python, is that, well, you have a bad time with it again, because Python with the newer version of Python might have a slightly different but still very impactful difference on interpreting code. And that's again unavoidable. Actually, most of those things, if I remember correctly, three of those points is pretty much unavoidable. Actually, here what I see, it's actually 4 points. So five of the 4 points listed are, sorry, that's the contrary. Four of the 5 points are listed are actually unavailable, because Python is different. So again, it's slow because it tries to interpret the code for you, and it needs more memory for that, so it's not exactly memory efficient. It's weak on mobile computing because mobile computing works with limited resources, which is not good for Python because it needs more resources and more time. It's also, well, bad because if the Python itself changes and it tries to interpret your files in a different way, pretty much your code in a different way, then, well, bugs everywhere, or again, the runtime error. So very interesting indeed to know. Again, I like to think about this because I like to understand the limits of Python, or what I'm working with, basically. I don't think it should make you, oh, it's a bad language, or it does not, perhaps it does not suit you. Maybe you have something else in mind. If you were trying to make a very, very, very light code to run on a Raspberry Pi, for example, so perhaps Python may not be for you. But I don't think if you are working with the, well, limitations of Python, I think it's a great language overall. Again, the code here pretty short. Again, look at the size of the code. If I shorten out without the unnecessary spaces, it's 4 lines of code to create and give a variable context. Sorry, I clicked out it. So it's 1 line to create a variable and to give it value in an input, and also print out the input, print uh, the variable, give a variable the new number, and then print it again. I think I don't think this is not something that happens, but you can see exactly how it is. And also, another reason why Python is slow is because it runs codes in lines. So it runs 1 line runs a second line, it runs a third line, and then a fourth line, and does this line as a list basically. It pretty much runs like a list. Again, one reason it's very slow. But what can I say? I think it's a good language, and I can't recommend it enough, especially since it's kind of my first language. So of course I'm gonna be happy about it. But well, that's pretty much my cons of my bads of Python. Again, do not be unmotivated by any way. If you want to learn Python, learn Python. I think it has great merit for it. But I think that's pretty much this for today. If you like it and if you like Python in general or programming in general, I think you should subscribe because well, it helps a lot. It helps me a lot, and not just that, but it helps a lot you perhaps because you don't need to check out every day. You can just press the subscribe button and the bell so you just receive a notification when videos come out. Not just that, but if you're more curious, you can access the last video, which is the pros of Python. So why you should, well, you see what's the good in Python. So today I was a bit more negative, I would say. Again, just trying to understand the limits of the language. But again, access that video and also access my other content like the ongoing series I'm doing of me learning Python. I think we are episode 23, tomorrow with 24th. So yeah, great stuff. I hope you liked this video and if you did, again, like and subscribe and I see you tomorrow. Bye!